Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag. I'm your host, Darcy, and with me is my co-host, Nathaniel.
Hello, Darcy. Thank you for having me on. What are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about used clothing markets.
And before we do, we also want to say thank you so much to Sue Sullivan.
Thank you, Sue. You're amazing for reaching out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we obviously were intending to do this episode, but she messaged us asking for some information before the episode came out, in the off chance that we
get our act together and put this episode out before she and her family come to Rome.
Yeah, so we were able to, it was also nice, I was able to do some fun preliminary research for the email back to her, and that's basically the basis of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also just amazing to hear from people who listen. We I don't know, it's always such a really nice treat. It's just, it's fun because it means that somebody's listening to what we're saying.
You all exist, you're really there.
Which is amazing and lovely. So I guess used clothing markets. Is that what we're talking about?
That's what we're talking about, yeah.
That is what we're talking about. And I guess the draw here is, it's not a typical thing, I would say, for traveling. Like,
used clothing markets?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something...
Not anymore. I mean, I know I have heard a lot of stories from people older than us who traveled, I don't want to say that much older than us, but, in the 80s and 90s and before then. And the idea was that when you traveled, you brought a t-shirt and a pair of pants and 2 pairs of underwear. And if your shirt got holes in it, you tossed it and got another shirt. But that's not really typical anymore. I think first because it's expensive, but also because a lot of people are a little bit more environment minded. Yeah, sustainable minded, which is not to say that traveling that way back in the day was bad. It's just that things have changed.
I think it's also hard because you maybe in because we do have friends who are like, oh, I love traveling around in the 70s or the 80s, and it's sort of, not to say they weren't using polyester clothing, but not every cotton shirt had polyester in it kind of thing. And I mean that's one of the biggest issues these days are these sort of just what to do with the abundance of clothing that they can't sell, and it's the whole, you can get in the whole fast fashion thing, and you can get into the whole, sort of microplastics. So I don't think that it's as common to from our experience, just for people to go somewhere and to buy clothing. And it also seems that more and more people these days, you have your set outfits. I have 7 different outfits. They all work together. I have 2 jackets. They work with my tops. I have 3 or 4 pairs of shoes. They work with the bottoms. It's sort of everything's a little bit more curated, and part of that, Instagram or something it's where it's...
But also when you travel, these days you get maybe 1 carry-on bag and maybe a checked bag if you're lucky. So I think it's not that typical for us to go and buy a lot of vintage clothes because then we'll have to bring them home.
Right. And sending them home is ridiculously expensive. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, we would actually like to talk about finding used clothes because it's something that Darcy and I do when we travel. It's part of it is because we really enjoy the sort of we find really interesting things.
We like feeling like we're scrounging through sort of the rubble to find the diamond in the rough.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that if you also enjoy that, we have quite a bit of advice for you and some location advice. But I think maybe before we talk about that, should we talk about the markets themselves, or to talk about the idea of the market?
Yeah, let's talk about the generalness,
the generality,
of Roman markets,
or Italian markets, I think,
or Italian markets, yeah.
And if you've ever been, I guess for those of you who have been to Italy, you probably have already, or if you've lived in Italy, you already have an idea of what the markets will be like in Italy, as far as just the layout, as far as the proper etiquette, if you will. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't been to Italy, and the reason we bring this up is it's kind of a 2-3-fold reason. One, I think there's still a good number of people who have sort of certain ideas of how Italy is, or how it maybe used to be, but it isn't anymore. And even silly things that have nothing to do with markets, but we keep saying that oh, Italy doesn't have ice, it's yes, Italy has ice. Ice exists in Italy, but people don't have ice machines, but it's certainly ice at the grocery store or cafes and stuff. But so in that vein, there's always these kind of haggling and this and that and the other thing. And I think
Oh, I see what you mean. Like old school ideas of like, oh, when you go to Italy, you're going to haggle for the right price.
exactly.
Yeah. But we haven't seen that happen.
We haven't seen that. I think though it's like, I think maybe it's just maybe my father telling me that, oh, you could negotiate. And I think part of the reason we bring it up though is it is because, another of the reason is it's not an attraction. It's not necessarily like,
Yeah.
it's not like a museum, basically. It's not like
It's not a theme park.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is people's livelihoods, is selling their wares, essentially.
Yeah.
But I think it's similar to if you're from the U.S. The markets here look a lot like sort of like a mile-long flea market out in the Midwest or whatever. There's specific places that you can go in the U.S. For really long flea markets out on the streets, or maybe similar to like a car boot sale in the UK or in France. But I think it's always important for me to remember that this really is people's daily lives. It's not some fun thing that they do every once in a while. They come sell stuff out of their attic, or it's not something that they do just for tourists. It's just their everyday.
Yeah. And it's just to be like conscientious of that and respectful of it as you're there, as you're at the markets, as you're talking. And as also it's like sort of a change in expectation. We'll talk about it later. But for instance, if you're there to buy shoes, yes, people will help you find your size. But it's not like, going to the Gap or something like that where they will help you find your size shirt or size pants or anything like that.
And it depends on the market. I mean, you really kind of have to suss it out. You have to vibe it out. Some of the sellers will be really enthusiastic about helping you find something. And some of them won't. They'll just kind of hang back and let you do your own thing. So you just gotta vibe it out.
Yeah. And I think with the clothing specifically, just to sort of give people a bit of a heads up, a little warning, is typically speaking, if it's not in a store, and we'll talk about that as well, but in the actual markets, it's just clothing piled on tables. It's just mounds of clothing. And there is some, usually almost always, there's some separation as far as, it depends, I guess, because some places separate it by material. They'll be like, this is the linen section, this is the wool section, this is everything else. So,
it is generally separated by gender or sex, though, right? Like men's and women's.
Right.
There's not usually like a unisex section. There is usually like a random kids section, know.
There's obviously like the sort of towels and tablecloths and things like that as well. But I think sometimes even with like, for instance, in the women's section, it'll be women's, and then it'll be like the slightly nicer stuff that's €5, and then that's cute for €2. For any men listening, it's we sort of get the shorter end of the stick, I think. Almost always there's going to be like, if one stall, for instance, will have like 6 or 7 like women's clothing, and then like 2 and like, for men, and it'll be sort of the there's like 6 pairs of pants on one table, and then there's like 8 shirts on the other. So I've noticed myself, it's kind of difficult to find clothing simply because it's just not
also because you're kind of a large person. You're like 6'3", 6'4", broad, and not a broad, but your shoulders are broad.
Thanks, babe.
No, but I think you find a lot of women's clothes or things that are sorted into women's clothing.
That's true.
That you would wear.
Yeah.
Were you a smaller person?
Well, that's the thing too, because there is, I don't know if you guys have ever been like to Goodwill. It's the same thing. Like you find an amazing pair of pants and you're like, these are, and then you're like, 6XL, that's kind of weird. And then you realize like, they're kind of cut in a different way than I was hoping.
Yeah. You're not quite your XL.
Yeah. So there is that for sure. And I think part of it is just this. They try to be careful. They seem like the vendors are typically pretty careful, because I mean, I know I always get a little heartbroken when I find like a linen shirt and I'm like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And then I realize it's just cut in a way that sort of accommodates a bosom I do not have. Or in some, it's a sort of, I don't know, I get very excited finding clothes, and then I can also get heartbroken
when they're too small for you.
When they're too small for me.
You do get the short end of the stick.
And if you are there, I will say though, Rome is the easiest so far that we've been to. That's the easiest to find clothes my size, because there is that sort of, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of Italian men, especially. I mean, we live.
They're just smaller people.
Yeah, and we live in the South predominantly, and there's just, I mean, like I have a size 40 waist US typically. Even 38. I mean, it's like I sometimes I'll go to Gap and it's 36, and I know they're just lying to me at that point. But it's 40, you know, at most places. Especially, I always use outdoor stores as like a good sort of measuring stick, because they typically don't do too much vanity sizing. I know, like, I just, again, like I love going to the Gap and be like, oh, 36, things are going well for me today. But I'm a size 40, and that can be really hard to find in Italy. I mean, the biggest I'll get is a really accurate size 36, and that is not getting buttoned. And I think the other end of the spectrum, I'll find like 48, 50, and then it's just like, oh, okay. So there's not a lot in that middle range.
Sizing? Is that what you mean?
Sorry, no, in
Okay.
US 48, 50.
Okay.
It's just much, much, much larger than I am, or much smaller than I am. And it also doesn't help that I'm tall. Like you pointed out, it's like I don't get that. Everything kind of comes up to like either my mid calf if it's pants, or if it's like, you know, shirt, it's like, oh, belly button, that's nice. So it can be, I mean, if depending on what size, you know, body shape you have, it can be kind of difficult.
But being in Rome, I feel like
Exactly.
there are more metropolitan sizes, if we can call it that. Like, you know, your mom lives in the South, and she is tall for a woman.
Yeah.
I think, especially in Italy, she's like a full foot taller than most of the women.
Yeah.
And she often finds things that are cute but won't fit her because she is quite tall. But I have that maybe sort of Southern Italian shape. I'm like 5'4" and curvy, so like all of the clothes in Southern Italy fit me. But in Rome, there are people who are, you know, women who are taller than me.
That's true.
And men who are quite tall, and people who have, you know, all kinds of different body shapes, which coming from the US, I know this sounds ridiculous. Like, obviously there are many types of body shapes and heights and things, but in Southern Italy can be fine.
It can be really homogenized in Southern Italy. It can be like they're, like it's sort of a joke, like among Southern Italians, that Southern Italians don't have any ass. Yeah. And I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast. I mean, as I know, do I have to like mark it as I swore? I'm so sorry if I do. I'm trying to pretend like we're on like sort of daytime television, or like 6 o'clock where it gets a little bit, but it's a joke because it's like every Southern Italian man practically has just it's like they all have to use belts, and even then nothing gets held up, and they all, like, everyone jokes about it. It's a sort of classic, like, I don't know, it's just sort of the running gag is that no one can keep their pants on. So it's, you know, again, like,
for lack of a behind,
for
not for other reasons.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to talk about that on this podcast. But again, I mean, I'm coming from the other end of the spectrum where it's like I've just larger in the thigh area. So I have to find the ones that aren't going to split when I sit down.
But in Rome, we have found at vintage markets a lot of the clothes will come from Germany, so they are your size. And then in like vintage shops, the clothes will come from all over the world. So there are lots of different sizes. So if you're coming to Rome, probably no matter your body type, you'll be able to find clothes at markets or vintage shops.
And I think, and as we mentioned already before, they are, like I said, the clothes are on the table as well. So and I mention this because they all have been washed, sort of industrial washed. Definitely wash these again when you get home, kind of thing, or back to your Airbnb, or your, you know, if you want to use them when you're there, you know, wash them in the sink at the hotel and hang them to dry. But in case, like, we see some people with gloves on and stuff like that, just because everyone has dirty hands, everyone's looking through stuff, but it's not just the clothes. It's like, you know, you go looking through the used shoes, and then you go to the clothes, and then you maybe get something to eat, so then you have greasy hands, and you go back to the clothes. So it can be a little like... I
mean, there's just people want to be swapping around the common cold.
Exactly. You know? Well, now that the thing is, though, now it's post-COVID, it's a little bit... so it's a little... most of these markets we're going to mention, because Italy in general has pretty much dropped a lot of their COVID restrictions. So most of these men's we're going to mention no longer have COVID restrictions, but they used to have a lot of mask restrictions and distancing and this and that, but no more. And I think that's kind of like the main things we really just wanted to mention is be prepared for a pile of clothing, and then just like try to, you know, do as Romans do, so to speak. You know,
and bring water.
And we're going to talk about that a lot in this episode, which is going to sound really repetitive.
But they are all outside for the most part, and we're what month is this? We're July,
July
right now.
And I think we're in a really strange heat wave.
Yeah.
And it's the last day, but it's been 100 degrees every day for the last 4 or 5 days, I think. And not just in Rome, but like from Florence all the way down to southern Italy. It's just been a really hot, which is abnormal here. Usually, we've come every summer for the last few summers, we've come for the last 3 summers, I could have just said. But it rarely hits 100 degrees. It's like usually 90 to 95. That's like, ooh.
Which for a lot of people is quite hot, though.
That's true.
We're from Savannah, Georgia, so we're used to heat. But just stay hydrated.
If you're not, it's actually kind of miserable. And we're going to talk about that a lot, especially as we talk about the Porta Portese market. But before then, if you don't mind listening to a short ad, we would love it. We get paid 1 cent for every ad you listen to. And I cannot tell you how much we really need. Enjoy the 1 cent. And we'll be right back after that. Welcome back from hearing my voice to hearing my voice. I do apologize, by the way, for the quality of that ad. I can't use this microphone to make it, so I had to speak very softly and subtly into the microphone on my laptop, and it sounds very different, and I apologize for that.
But the good news is, the more 1 cents that we get from you guys listening to ads, the closer we get to getting better microphones.
And better ads, I'm hoping. Like maybe 2 cent ads. 5 cent ads, and I would be over the moon. Which I will say, I don't know, which is totally off topic, but it's nice. It pays well for what it was. I mean, you get a cent. I think Spotify pays 1/10 of a cent per listen, and this pays 1 cent per listen. So we're not complaining. We're very happy with it. Mm-hmm. That's completely off subject. Let's talk about the Porta Portese market. Thanks, guys, for hanging in with us. We really appreciate it. So the first market is the Porta Portese market, and it's probably the most famous market in Italy. I'd be willing to bet.
Definitely Rome.
Definitely Rome, oh for sure. But I'm thinking there's some famous like leather market goods in Florence and things like that. But I would think it's because it is one of the longest running flea markets in the world. Not the longest running, I don't believe, but it is definitely one of the longest running flea markets.
And it has had songs written about it.
That's true.
And movies written about it and filmed in it and all kinds of things.
And so what would basically first actually want to mention when it's open. I think that'd be just so if you guys can plan. It's
open Sundays from 7 to 2.
And only Sundays.
Only Sundays, yes.
Okay, so Sunday 7 to 2. That 2 is a soft 2. Let's just say. Yeah. In our experience, some people are out by 1 because it's like. I guess to kind of give you an explanation of what it looks like, it's essentially a street, and at one end of the street, it sort of makes a little U-turn and turns back onto a second street. So it almost looks like a bit like a candy cane, or actual cane. I don't know why I had to say candy cane. So it looks like a candy cane. It's sort of the market set up, and it's just out on the street, and
it is so long.
Yeah, and when the first time you go, I mean, I will say that 10th time you go, you might be like, I thought this was bigger. But that first time we went, we got there at like, I don't know, 10 or something like that. And then we hadn't even gotten through a small portion of it by the time it was like 11:30. And that's when some of the first people start cleaning up, mainly because it takes like an hour and a half for them to clean up. But also, and we're going to mention this a few times, some of these markets have a much firmer end time than others. And it's like, some are like, by 2 would be great if you guys are gone, which meant 3:30.
In Italian time, yeah.
Yeah, and some are like, we will fine you if you're here at 2:01. So some places just sort of also, they all bring in their tiny little 4-panel trucks or their Sprinter vans, or sometimes it's just their station wagon. So it can be a nightmare getting out of there for them. So they try to, they being the vendors, try to load up early and leave.
And I don't know that I need to mention this, but if you see people, like, okay, so we mentioned that the clothes and towels or whatever it is that you're purchasing will be all in a pile on the table typically. But if you see people sort of, they'll fold them up nicely and kind of lash them together with a little ribbon or whatever, that means they're tidying up and that bundle is going in the van.
Yeah.
So you would probably know that. You would surmise that if you saw it happening. But just so you know, if you see a little bundle, that's going in the van. It's not for sale anymore.
Yeah. And also, I mean, like, in our experience, the table is still fair game if the person selling the things is tidying up.
Right.
But the stuff they've already they everything's kind of folded like once, or like twice sometimes. But essentially, they all folded nicely and stacked. That is off limits. But what's on the table totally on limits as long as the vendor has not touched it yet.
Yeah.
And to get to Porto Portesi, we talked. We're gonna try to give you throughout the whole thing. We're gonna try to give some advice on how to get to these places. Most of these are not difficult. There's, I think, 2 different tram lines running to Porto Portesi. One of them, though, is actually going to be closed. If you're listening to this in 2023, you guys are good. But I think it's closed for the next 12 or even 18 months. I can't remember. They're renovating it. So 2024, Porto Portesi Market, you can absolutely take this tram there. Until then, there's one other one. There's a couple of buses. There is no metro there, though. You're going to have to walk from the nearest metro station. It's really not bad. It's basically just south of Trastevere. It's in the Trastevere market, but there's a sort of old Trastevere part that's the sort of...
In the Trastevere neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a very romantic looking one. It's like this. There's a Jewish ghetto, is what it's the southernmost point of that area, north of the Jewish ghetto. The Jewish ghetto is north of the Porto Portesi. The Porto Portesi just means the Portesi gate, and you'll know if you've gone too far because then there's a bunch of signs saying Jewish ghetto in English, and then you go back towards the Porto Portesi. But it's very easy to find. And everybody, you can just ask, people on the street, "Scusa, Porto Portesi? Non lo so," and they'll, point you in the direction.
Yeah. Everybody's going to that market in that neighborhood. If you get off the bus or the tram, follow the group of people, and you're more than likely you're going to get there.
And if you've been to flea markets, this is going to sound repetitive to you, so we go ahead and apologize. But essentially, it's different vendors, 100, 200 vendors.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's definitely...
I would say more than that.
Okay, so it's potentially a few hundred vendors selling everything from clothing, shoes, art, home goods, antiques, knickknacks. There are some food, textiles,
shoes.
Yeah. There's also some. I think there's like a couple that sell food. Like there'll be like cheeses and stuff. It's not a food market though.
No, it's just like if you're incredibly hungry, here's a sandwich.
Oh no, I mean sorry. There are a couple that sell like the packaged cheeses and stuff like that.
Yeah. Almost like a little grocery market.
Yeah, but there aren't. It's not like the market for it, and there won't be very many. And essentially, it's one of those things. There is kind of, but during COVID, the last couple of years during COVID, they did have a sort of entrance and exit, which they hadn't really had before. So you kind of like when you're entering, you had to put on your mask, and when you're exiting, you could take it off again, and that sort of dictated the entrance and exit. But besides that, it's
the flow of
traffic, yeah. And it is packed. I mean, yes. If it's one of those things, if you're sort of if you have any sort of, I think, what is it? Not agoraphobia, but it's sort of being around people, sort of that sort of. If you're one of those people, I mean, even like us, we kind of, I like being around people for an hour. Hour number 4, I start really not liking being around people. I
am a little bit worse. I can walk into a crowd and within 30 seconds immediately panic.
Yeah, so it can be. It's also, I think if you're shorter too, you can't. Yeah. I get the fresh air that's up at that 6'2". So I think we can both. It can be a lot. It can really be like. Part of it is it's in the summer. Obviously, if you're going to be there, I mean, it runs, I believe, year round. But if you are there in the summer. It's hot, it's sticky, people are hitting into you, bumping into you, breathing on you, jumping in front of you. I mean, it can be like a lot of stimulation. And if you're not used to it, it can actually be a little overwhelming. So just as a, again, small piece of sort of advice, heads up kind of thing.
Which is not, definitely go, but just kind of be aware of that. If you're somebody who is that way, I'm sure you're used to, clocking little, places that you can get away. And I am okay. I do freak out in crowds sometimes, but I've been able to get through it mostly because I'm just excited to be able to find great stuff. But also because it's not that you're going to be like in a mosh pit the entire time. You can get in the middle of the road and just kind of keep walking until you find a a quiet place to,
Yeah.
rest for a few minutes. So you'll be fine.
And then again, like I said, it sells everything, but it's also, I would go ahead and err on the side of caution and bring cash. Very few vendors have turned to using anything electronic, just because it's just not worth it for them. Typically, the transaction fees. So I would bring cash if I were you. But the price, to give you an idea of the price, is like there's almost always like a 50-cent table, and that is going to be
For clothes.
Sorry, to clarify. Different vendors, and I will say there's no real like confederation of sellers. So it's not like that. I don't think there's really, it's hard to know if people are working together or against each other. We never really get the impression they're working against each other. Mm-hmm. It sort of seems like, because if you go multiple weeks, you'll see like, oh, this person had linen last time, but this time they have something else, and it's a table down there that has linen. So it's hard to tell if there is some sort of communication as far as like, let's not compete with each other on this,
A bit of a give and take between the vendors, yeah.
Yeah, and we've had some weeks like with certain vendors, and it's just like, wow. Like Darcy had this week with this one vendor, and she bought I think 4 or 5 these vintage dresses for 50 cents each from the 60s to the 70s, and I think they're 2 of them were like somebody made them themselves in their sewing machine, and again, it's one of those, it's basically there is a 50-cent table typically at one of these vendors, and it goes all the way up to about 20 euros. And those will be jackets or nicer clothes or
large pieces of linen
sometimes. So it's, we're saying that's not necessarily like you're going to find a great deal, but just maybe be a little bit wary if somebody asks for 30 or 40 euros for something, that's not typical at all.
For a
piece of
clothing.
Or for
there are new clothing stalls.
That's true. I'm sorry. That's very true.
That will have more expensive clothing. Doesn't mean it's a better quality. It just is more expensive. And we call those sometimes like market clothes. So you can tell that they're, I would say like H&M quality, but they're, to me, expensive, like $20 for a shirt or something. But at Porta Portesi, they also have a little bit more like artisanal clothing sometimes. Like there will be stalls that are locally made clothes or sort of artsy, I don't know, and those would be more expensive.
Absolutely. And I think, so if it's new, that's definitely 20 to 40 is actually normal. If it's not new, don't pay more than 20 maybe. Yeah. It's also, this is just us, we've heard a lot back and forth on this. I typically trust the brands I see. I mean, I'm not, okay, well, like, maybe that's not true. I don't buy fashion house brands. I don't buy like high fashion brands. So like, I probably wouldn't trust them either, but I've found really nice like Fjallraven things or Marmot things or North Face so these are all outdoor stores, but I see a lot of outdoor stuff, and it's like, I don't think anybody's faking these.
Right. I see what you're saying.
So some people be like, oh no, it's all fakes. So like, don't spend money on those. It's all going to be fake.
I don't think those are fake. There definitely are the stalls of like Louis Vuitton handbags on the ground. Those likely are not real. But no, I mean, if you find just a good random thing in a pile and it's, not Chanel, it's probably real. Yeah.
It's also, and so there's also like, it's the same thing with shoes. There are, as Darcy was saying earlier with the kind of the new clothes, there are new shoe stalls. These aren't typically going to be brands you've ever heard of or anyone's ever heard of. They're market brands. So it's like, it's typically, unfortunately, one or two things. Either they're made in another country, more often than not China. They're brought over and they're finished in Italy and they put the made in Italy label on it. Or they are made in Italy, but there are the accusations of, rather than, they're accusations of sweatshops, basically, in Milan. There are a lot of like immigrants, basically, and so there's a lot of accusations as far as most of these clothes are made in sweatshops in that region, in the more industrialized regions. And so they are technically, yes, made in Italy, but they might try to act as if they're, made by, it was just some really kind people and not...
And you'll probably be able to pick those out. Yeah. I mean, Nathaniel and I plump for the vintage antique, if I can sound British, stalls, and they look very different from the new clothing stalls and new shoe stalls. And also, that being said, I did mention the sort of artsy or locally made. And again, you'll be able to tell. I mean, there are times when I definitely walk over and get really excited about a group of shoes or a group of clothing and pick up an item and realize that it's not very well made. Or maybe it is, and it's an incredible find, but you'll be able to tell.
Absolutely. And so the new shoes, there are plenty of new shoes. I mean, they're fine. You know, I mean, like they're, let me phrase this. There are a lot of new shoe stalls for women's shoes.
Yes.
Honestly, most of them don't even sell men's shoes, or men's sandals. I do apologize. This is all over the place, by the way, guys. Like, we do apologize. I think we have this, like, we have notes and stuff, but we realize that we're trying to come at this, I realize, from acting as if essentially that, like, if people have never seen a market in Italy before, for us, I think there's a lot of, like, when we first went, I think, to some markets, there's a little bit of embarrassment, like, you know, like, do we speak Italian? Do we just try on stuff? Do we ask for this? You know, and then there's also like that sort of like feeling we're missing out because we don't know what to do. So if it's all over the place, it's just so we can give you as much information as possible about what to do and where to go. So it isn't like we're hopping from like clothes to shoes to this to that. It's more about the trying to give as much information as possible. But there are going to be new shoe stalls that have, you know, cute, interesting, nice, well-priced, usually 15 to 30 euro shoes, basically. And there's also used shoe stalls, and those are just, I mean, they're very used. They're not washed or cleaned or anything. It's, if you want to try on some shoes, bring some socks. They're not like amazing by any, I mean, if you need a pair of, I mean, honestly though, if it's like, I have made the mistake of not bringing like sandals or flip-flops or sneakers, and I'm like, oh, that's actually not bad. They're €5 for a pair of Adidas, you know, like classic Adidas shoes, or sort of Nike running shoes or something like that. I'm like, that's really actually not a bad deal. And some of these aren't like, you know, destroyed. They really don't sell destroyed clothing. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be really like, it's going to be I mean, we often see labels still on the clothing on the used table. It's just somebody got something for Christmas and didn't want it.
Like tags, you mean? Like
tags. You're not finding stuff for like stained and holes and this and that. They don't sell those. Sometimes at the 50-cent table, it'll be like, yeah, this needs some work. You have to get the stains out, but it's, you know, it's a beautiful, you know, shirt once you get the stains out. These Darcy and I always, if we buy them, we just dye them. That's the project. Yeah. But the other thing about Porto Portesi is or two things is, one, bathrooms. I think we mentioned it in much earlier episode that we, it's one of the things we always kind of keep our eyes up for, because you don't want to like be having fun somewhere and then all of a sudden there's a pee and then can't find anywhere to pee and then you're just really not having fun. So there are cafes up and down the Porto Portesi area. They are 100% expect people to come in and just pee. We always like to buy coffee to be nice. No one expects that. You can just go in, you know, ask for the bathroom and use the bathroom. So don't feel embarrassed if you're like, you know, I'd be having so much fun if I didn't have to pee. And, you know, and the other thing is, Darcy mentioned earlier, water. Yeah. Drinking water.
You need to bring water to the Porto Portesi. There is one fountain, I think, like water fountain. Yeah. And it is on the strip that is right in the sun, which is convenient. But there's usually a very large line because that is the one water fountain. At the cafes, you can definitely buy water, little bottles of water, if you've forgotten your water bottle. But just be really cognizant of staying hydrated.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about this, I think, later in a different episode, but it is, as a very little, again, it's a little bit of just background. A lot of Rome is stone, I keep saying floors in my head. What is it called? Roads. Stone roads. And they're black stone. And it's usually very tight streets. And it's stone walls in the streets. And it's just, they just absorb the heat and they radiate the heat back. And even in the evening, once the sun's gone down, certain roads are easily 10 degrees warmer than other roads. Some of these roads do not get the breeze. And even though Porto Portesi is right on the river, you wouldn't even be able to tell. So it's like with something that Darcy mentioned earlier, we're from Savannah. We're very much used to humidity. We're very much used to hot weather that just drains you. But that first time we went to Porto Portesi, we just were not like paying attention. We weren't. I mean, although the stalls are under the tents, and people do a good job of trying to, like, even some of the vendors will erect these like tarps and stuff between them and other stalls to sort of give people a little path to go between, to not having to be in the sun. It can still get really hot. Yeah. So again, if you feel obviously not to be your parent, but if you do feel hot, leave and then come back. Really, it's not worth passing out. I think that's everything for the Puerto Portesi market.
Yeah, it's awesome. If you can go, I suggest going. Oh, it will take you a while to get through. If you haven't gathered that from us droning on about all the different things about it, it's long, and you might be there for, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
There's also, by the way, if you want some other unoffered opinions, unsolicited advice. There we go. Thank you. Wow, unoffered opinions. Aren't all opinions unoffered? Sorry, there's a loud noise in the background of somebody drilling. We're actually in Rome now, which is why you might hear some background noises. We apologize. We were in the south of Italy where it could be quiet for a few hours a day. We forgot that Rome is sort of a nonstop noise, at least where we are. But in the sort of neighborhoods around Porto Portesi, there are some really nice restaurants, especially in Trastevere. If you're okay not eating while you're there, not getting a sandwich or a snack or something like that, if you're okay, it's like within 5 minutes you can hit some really nice and affordable restaurants in Porto Portesi, in Trastevere, that are in the shade, that are underneath tarps or underneath tents, and it really is actually kind of for us. I think the first time ever we went to Porto Portesi, we just went back home afterwards and pretty much passed out from heat and dehydration. But then we started going out for lunches, and it was actually really nice because it's sort of, you get an hour where you just can chill out, recharge. It's
really nice too because Porto Portesi market happens on a Sunday, and then so we go to the market. I inevitably are exhausted even if we have been hydrating, and then we can walk to Trastevere, which is beautiful. It's a beautiful neighborhood, as anybody will tell you, but it's also completely unshaded, so it's hot. But there are some great little restaurants, like Nathaniel said, so it's really fun to have a long Sunday morning and then a great typical Sunday lunch at 1:30, 2 in the afternoon. It's so nice, and just to have that rest and that time, and maybe splurge. We tend to find less expensive restaurants, but it's so worth it to have that time to rest and to just take a minute to eat.
And to splurge, just so people, I feel like it's helpful to have a price on it. We typically try to only spend between 5 to 8 euros a person when we go out to eat, whether it's pizza or something like that. So splurging for us is like 12, maybe even 15 a person. And that would come down if you don't drink beer or something like that. That's always the killer for us. So just so when we say splurge, just know that we mean 30 euros.
Yeah. Which for many people is still affordable.
Yeah. Which is very much a very cheap dinner. What's the second one on the list?
Via Sagno.
Via Sagno. I think it's just called the Via Sagno market, by the way, for anybody who's listening. Via means street, so it's the Sagno street market. And it's, I guess, again, so starting with times and location, it's on Via Sagno, believe it or not. And
it's Monday to Saturday.
Monday to Saturday. What time is it?
9 to 4.
9 to 4. So this one is, okay, so this is great. So
it's just all week. You just pop in, have a little time. It's not nearly as big as Porto Portesi. But it still has the little stalls. And it's under...
It's kind of under a mix of bed sheets, tarps, and
it's like a little ragtag tent.
Yeah, they did a really good job. It's originally it would have been sort of the passageways would have just been uncovered, and then the stalls would have been covered. But clearly, every year they pile more stuff on top of it. It's lit. It's the sunlight gets through, but it's shaded, and it's really quite pleasant because it's smaller. But because it's Monday to Saturday, we always go on a Friday or Saturday anyway.
It's so relaxed.
That's the thing. There's 15 people there, maybe 20 people there. There isn't that same energy at Porto Portesi of we have to hurry up because they're going to be closing any minute now. They leave their stuff there. They just lock up the entrance to the market because it's kind of inside and kind of fenced in. So there's not this weird panicked energy that's underlying the whole event. No. It is smaller, but there's also the big thing that I find about Via Sagno is there are more specific stalls, I think is a good way to put it. There is for used clothing especially, it's like there's one guy that sells like lederhosen and sort of traditional German dresses. So I'm not, there's a name for them. I have no idea. Isn't there dreidels? No, drainels?
Dirndl?
Dirndl? Okay.
Dirndl?
You can tell that we are not well traveled in Germany. And so
Just Italy.
We should really cut that part out. Wow. Anyway, point is, new dreidel sounded wrong. So he sells those, and there's another one who sells a kind of just like not necessarily pajamas, but it's sort of nightgowns. It's like all vintage nightgowns.
That's a great style.
One woman sells a lot of dresses, like linen dresses, and they're almost like wedding dresses, but they're not. They're just very fancy, very vintage. Vintage in the sense of being like 100 years old. Linen dresses, and there's still this. I mean, there's one table of all jerseys, like. I don't know. I mean, basically, it's like soccer jerseys and that kind of stuff. Some of them are local, some of them are not local. They're big teams. So if it's, I mean, I kind of like it because if you're looking for something specific or weird, they might actually have it. Or if you're looking for gifts, I mean, honestly, it's a great market to find like. Anytime my uncles went traveling, they always brought me back a soccer jersey because I mean that was the one you could easily make me happy with that.
Yeah.
And I have cousins and nieces and nephews that I think also like they play soccer and they're over the moon when they get a jersey. So it's an easy way. I mean, I don't have to tell anybody it's used. You can keep that to myself.
But also like a vintage Italian nightgown. What a fun gift. But speaking of gifts, so comparing Viasagno to Porta Portesi, Viasagno doesn't have the little knickknacks.
Yes.
Or antiques. They have, vintage clothing, but Porta Portesi will have the art and little knickknacks and tchotchkes and gifts and all that little stuff. But Viasagno is really just clothes.
It's also, I think, a little easier to get to than Porta Portesi because it's on the Metro Line A, the orange Metro Line, which you can basically there's only 3 in Rome, and it's on the San Giovanni stop. But it's really, I mean, it's like a 2-minute walk from there, 3-minute walk from there. Super easy to find. Again, it's one of those things everybody knows where it is. You can just ask directions.
And I will say, because I was confused by this whenever we first went, all over Rome, you'll see little markets popped up, in the street, little white tents. And so when you're going to the Viasagno market, it's inside, essentially. It's inside a gate, and it has, it's covered by what we were talking about, the sort of like ragtag tent sort of situation. But in front of it, there are those white tents of used clothes and things, and we always look through that as well. But it's not necessarily part of that market, so don't stop there permanently. Have a little look around and then keep going inside to the Viasagno market, because I got caught up on that the first time, thinking that these 4 little tents were all of it. Yeah,
that's actually a good point. That it does give the impression that that's the market, but then you get to the market and realize that, oh, this is the market.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, kind of all for that one. It is just a much smaller. It's a local market. Yeah.
It does not have a bathroom inside. Just
True.
So you know, there is currently in July 2022. There's a little cafe. I think there's a cafe across the street. There's one on the corner that's very cute. So again, just go there for the bathroom and for any water or whatever you need.
Yeah. So that's going to be the sort of, I think, more or less, that's going to be the running theme of go to the nearest cafe. Even we were just walking around yesterday. Even the really nice cafes that you're like, oh my god, they have like these black waistcoats and little bow ties. You can go in and be like, hey, can I use the bathroom? And they're like, yeah, it's in the back.
I mean, just be nice about it. Of course, yeah.
I mean, they're just. I think we mentioned this before. We have no idea if it's a law. We should probably find out if it's like they have to allow you to use the bathroom. But even like if you look up public restrooms in Rome, like in Italian, and then Google Translate the results, you'll get results that are essentially every cafe is a public bathroom. It's not sort of like there's no codes or anything like that. So don't feel embarrassed. Everyone here is very on the up and up with it. So I think that's kind of it for Viasagno, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, that's it. It's small. It's got quirky, interesting stuff, and it's really relaxed. And
I will say, I think I mentioned this very briefly, but it's very much the locals market. So it is, I think it's one of those funny things where you're going to find more stuff for Romans there than you might as a tourist. It's like it's not a lot of Italian things there because
that's a good
a
point.
lot of Italians go there to get non-Italian things.
Yeah.
So it's one of the, I mean, I think we talked about that with the Esquilino market, the food market, in a couple episodes ago. We talked about how it's the sort of the immigrant food market, quote unquote, because it's sort of where everyone who is an immigrant to Italy, or at least to Rome, will. It's
you can get curry and cilantro
exactly.
and limes,
and plantains. I mean, it's like really like the sort of kind of a really like it's sort of perfect place to go if you live in Rome because there's nowhere else to get those things. And the same thing with Viasano. It's the perfect place because it's like where else are you going to find a dirndl?
A dirndl?
I should have looked this up. I don't
or
know.
An African drum.
Or an African drum.
Of which there are many names, so I'm not going to try.
Yeah, or at least just a, I don't know, very cool night dress.
Mm-hmm.
So what's next?
Let's talk about Ponte Milvio.
Well, that's close to home, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right down the street from us.
We were staying at a house at the Ponte Milvio neighborhood, which Ponte is bridge, so the Milvio Bridge. For this one, actually, I will go ahead and say that Porta Portesi and Viasano, if you are into kind of used clothes and if you are into markets and you're just like, I don't really care too much about museums, or we have 2 weeks, let's just see everything, including the markets, those are worth going to.
Yeah,
those are just,
absolutely.
I think, there's also other stuff around there, but it's a destination. Mm-hmm. Ponte Milvio sort of begins the rest of the list, which is not necessarily as much a destination as it is if you're within, 10 minutes of it, definitely worth checking out. It's sort of like the Michelin stars, when 1 star meant worth going to if it's on your way, 2 star meant worth going 10 minutes out of the way, and 3 stars meant worth going to as a destination. Now, of course, the meanings have changed. But it's sort of like that. Like the Ponte Milvio would be sort of our 2 star rather than our 3 star, simply because it's serviced by some buses and 1 tram. It's kind of not.
If you're not already here, it's difficult to get to. It's just out of the way.
It's just out of the way, yeah. And I will say, it's out of the way in a city, even like I would say almost in a small city sense. It's so still like, practically in the middle of Rome in that sense that it's like you're not going for hours out of your way. It's just one of those things of like, a lot of people coming to Rome will do this sort of, they'll go to the Colosseum, they'll go to the Piazza del Popolo, they'll go to the Spanish Steps, the Trevi Fountain.
And that's all in walking distance.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not in walking distance. However, Ponte Milvio, by a lot of tourist guides, is a bridge that you would be happy to visit. Mm-hmm. People go to see the bridge. I think it's called like the Lover's Bridge,
something
according
like that,
to some people, because
I think there's a movie was filmed there too, and they tried making the movie. Not recently, tried making it like the new Pont d'Art in Paris, the sort of like where every lock's still a lock to. It didn't really work. There's nowhere to lock a lock to.
But it's sort of like that, and the Ponte Milvio neighborhood is very cute. And this market, I think, reflects the neighborhood.
The market, I think to preface even the market, the neighborhood is a little bit more upscale than a lot of not the rest of Rome. There's nice neighborhoods and less nice, not even like less nice. I guess like it's one of those things that's like Rome doesn't have cheap neighborhoods. I guess it's one of those things. It's one of those in our, when I say Rome again, we mean this sort of small center, not the actual entirety of the city. It's sort of like, hey, New York City doesn't really have cheap neighborhoods anymore. It's just like, oh, that's either up and coming, that's gentrified, or that's just always been expensive. It's sort of Rome can kind of feel a little bit like that. So when we say nicer, we mean it's a little bit it has an older clientele typically in Ponte Milvio.
The restaurants are a little more like what I would call like bougie.
Yeah, exactly. But also more relaxed. They're more like they're often open to like midnight or past midnight, so people be on the street eating.
It's a neighborhood where people come to go on dates.
Yes,
if that gives you an idea.
Absolutely, there's a pretty big scene for that sort of dates, for drinking, for like not clubbing drinking, but like let's go have a drink underneath the sycamore trees, or let's go. It's a really lovely location for that. So that's all to preface this market, the Ponte Milvio Antiques Market, which is it's not on the actual bridge. It's just off the bridge along the river. It's open, I think.
It's only open on Sundays,
okay.
But 9 to 7. So all day.
So that's another Sunday only, I think. The Puerto Portuguese is another one. We'll talk about one or two more, I think, later that are Sunday as well. Most markets, for what it's worth, are Sunday only in Rome. If I think it's a good place to put the fact that if you only have time for one market, Puerto Portesi should be it, especially
Absolutely.
on Sundays. Ponte Milvio is it's the antiques market, basically.
I would say it has, usually about 10 tents?
And that's the thing, actually, it's because funny, you see, 10 tents I think is about accurate. And if you look online, I think it used to be much bigger just before COVID. Because everywhere online, it was last edited 2018, 2019, it said 100 tents, 75 tents. And now I think, 20 might be like, wow, it's packed.
That would be a big Sunday.
And they don't, unfortunately, it's just, it has gotten smaller over the year, over the COVID point.
But it has mostly antiques,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a couple of antique jewelry stalls. It'll have maybe a little bit of art, maybe one local artist stall.
There's like, again, the same, or there's a vintage linen is kind of a, I don't know how big a thing it is in Italy in the sense that like we really like it, but it's common to find pieces of linen, typically bed sheets, tablecloths, sometimes doilies, that type of stuff. That's within 100 or 150 years old, simply because, I mean, what are you doing with a bed sheet that it's wearing it away? It's like, and it's like, I mean, a lot of them have like this sort of history simply because it's like, oh yeah, this is my grandmother's bed sheet, or this is my great grandmother's bed sheet, and that's being told to you by somebody in their 70s or 80s, and it's like, oh, this is wow, this must be like an old bed sheet. So it's common to find these, and you can tell they're made on looms that are only about a meter wide. So they have to sew multiple of these together to make the width of an actual bed sheet. But they'll sell like the vintage, again, linen bed night dresses, that kind of stuff.
But actually, speaking of that, this is a market where you'll find really quality goods.
Yes.
If you're looking for nice jewelry, nice linen, nice tiny antiques, if you want to bring something small home, it's not fakes or anything like that. It's just nice antiques.
It's also, I think it is definitely because maybe it's because the clientele here is a little bit different. It's maybe a little older, a little bit more, I hate to use the word refined, but there's a like, if you're around Ponte Milvio, especially on a Sunday morning, you see a lot of the people that have clearly lived in Rome like their entire life. It's just, and they retired in Ponte Milvio kind of thing. Is a genuineness to the sort of refinement of the clothes that people wear and the sort of sunglasses or something like that. And so we've noticed, especially with the jewelry, it's a lot of really nice stuff, and it's not like, we're not talking $50 for a pair of earrings. We're talking €10 for a pair of earrings, or 20 for a necklace or something. But they're nice, or they're silver, or they're this, and the people that are selling these, again, it's not nobody's trying to like lie to you or pull one over on you, or
there's no swindling or anything like that.
I think they really want you to kind of enjoy what they're selling and then come back and buy more typically. And I think that's, I mean, I think I mentioned, you can only really get there one tram or a couple buses. I really recommend Googling that if it is something that it does interest you. Again, it's a neighborhood with a lot of restaurants too, so easy place to go and just spend a very relaxed morning, just hanging out in the neighborhood, eating some good food, and enjoying the water.
Yeah, it's just a sweet little market. And actually down the street, really. So if you're at the Ponte Milvio market, and then you're going south, so you would cross the Ponte Milvio bridge, essentially following the tram line. There's the Olympic Village market, which
That's
is
true.
held in it's a parking lot next to the Olympic Village. Yeah. Which is kind of cool. I think it's cool that it's in the Olympic Village, even though it's like falling apart.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
It's not attractive, the buildings, but still cool.
And that one is just, I mean, that one, again, that's a neighborhood market, very much a neighborhood market.
I mean, they have grocery stalls.
Like fruit and vegetables?
Fruit and vegetable stalls, yeah. And I mean, they'll have like maybe some pasta and stuff too, but there are 2 or 3 that really are like, people will go and get their week's worth of vegetables there. There's, I think, quite a number of new clothing stalls.
Yeah,
but
predominantly.
I would say like new boutique clothing.
Yes.
I mean, it's not, market clothing. It's not H&M. It's kind of nicer. It's almost like Charleston or like Hilton Head of markets, if you know of either of those two places.
No, it's almost, I was actually going to say like Sorrento or something like that. It's definitely that sort of vibe of like, again, I'll have a little bit of money. I'm okay spending 50 euros on a dress at the market, but I think partly because it's cut ever so slightly differently, and a pattern is again like I use the word refined, but it's simply to be like it's not like this fun, whimsical, weird thing I found. It's like, oh, this is stately. This is like,
yeah, exactly.
I'm going to Sorrento. I'm spending an afternoon on a boat, and I'm going to look really like, I'm going to look really well, nicely dressed doing it.
Yeah.
And they have like, the sunglasses stall that sell used sunglasses, but I mostly used. I think it was like used and new, but it's all like nice sunglasses.
Yeah, I'm used to finding sunglasses for like, $5.
Yeah.
I bought my pair of sunglasses, which to me, they're like, well, they've held up. They're nice. But these are like 40 and 50 euros.
But they're all of them are this sort of, at least at this one stall I'm thinking of, they're all like a sort of vintage Ray-Bans or Purcells or something like that. Some are old, they have the glass lenses rather than this. They're like...
They're quality.
They're like, oh, you're going to look really good if you have the money to spend that. There's also a forno, a bakery stall, you want to try some fresh bread. And
I think there were one or two used clothing areas, but it's not, that market is not about that.
No, it's really about servicing the neighborhood. So it is that first. And almost every market, by the way, will have at least, usually, not every market, but usually they'll have at least one used clothing thing, because it is just a typical thing to have. Yeah. But that's when, if you're going to head down, if you're going to take the tram back towards Piazza del Popolo, which is the like big piazza, has the giant Egyptian obelisk in the middle of it. You take the tram straight down there, straight south there, and that would be the first market you hit kind of on the way. Sunday morning, you said, is it? Or Friday,
no,
excuse me.
Fridays, yeah. That one's kind of an odd one. It really is, like you've been saying. It's about the neighborhood. So it's Fridays 7 to 2. So Friday mornings.
So if you're around there on Friday morning, then I think it's a perfect market to go to.
And then continuing down that same tram line, almost to Piazza del Popolo, is the Borghetto Flamingo market, which we actually haven't been to. It's on Sundays from 10 to 4. So usually on a Sunday we're at Porta Portesi or Ponte Milvio, just because Ponte Milvio is in our neighborhood. We have been by there on Sundays, and it's not always open.
And that's something we can't figure out if they changed if they do every other Sunday or something like that, or if they last 2 Sundays in the month. We cannot figure it out, because we've been a little bummed, because it's supposed to be, from our understanding, kind of take one of the classic used clothing stalls from Porta Portesi or something like that and kind of weed through all the just not so good stuff, and you're kind of left with a lot of the vintage high-end fashion brands, maybe not necessarily vintage, not necessarily high-end, but really interesting clothing, things that are like, wow, that's actually kind of a really, a fascinating piece. Something that sort of, they all seem to have flair. Like a lot of people who talk about it, they're like, it's a really cool market to go to if you're looking for really just like a unique pieces.
It's a little more curated too,
yes,
is what we've heard.
It's a little more curated, and the price reflects that. It's not, like with anywhere else in America, the more curated you go, the more you're paying, because you're paying to not spend hours there, kind of thing. Like, so you're not weeding through things like, oh, I'm going to find the best things in the world. You're kind of very much just paying somebody else to do that for you. And that one, you said, what is that, Sunday as well?
Sunday 10 to 4.
And that's on the same tram line. And that one, honestly, though, if you're near the Piazza del Popolo on a Sunday, and to give you another sort of reference, the Flamingo metro stop is also right there. So it's this little section, basically. It's not even that far a walk. It's maybe a 7-minute walk. There's some pizza places. There's a couple cafes. It's a nice little walk. It is in the sun. Again, bring water. But it really is quite a nice little situation if you're like, oh, you know what? We're 5 minutes away. Let's go check it out real quick and then come back. Especially if you are trying to spend the day in the main area.
The greater touristy area.
Exactly. And before we go to the next on the list, if you don't mind listening to another very quick ad, I think they're only 30 seconds, we would very much appreciate it. That he said that 1 cent is just doing us wonders.
Welcome back. Thanks for listening to that ad. Now you can hear my voice and not Nathaniel's voice. No, let's talk about Mercato Monti. Because I think that it's, to me, that's still in an easily accessible touristy area.
Yeah. It's a little, I mean, it's not even that far away. If you came through Termini, which is the main train station in the middle of town, whether you took the train or a bus from the airport, or whether you took a train from a different place, Mercato Monti is in the Monti neighborhood, which is kind of just like 10 minutes away by foot from Termini station. It's near the Cavour metro stop, Cavour. If you're on the metro, so it's like if you get off the metro and you're at Cavour, you could like spit and practically hit the building. It's really not that far. I mean, you can't get lost. I would say that, and this is not to me. I feel like I'm jinxing you, and you're gonna never find it. But yeah, the Mercato Monti market. That one's a really interesting. The market. Anyway, the Mercato Monti, or the Monti market. That's more of like a kind of a.
It's like artsy, hipster,
artisanal almost.
Yeah, but like new artisanal.
Yeah,
I want to say.
I think it's got like so the clothing that's there, curated.
Yes, and vintage.
And vintage.
Not all of it's not vintage, but the vintage clothing that is there is heavily curated. And genuinely, like, actually, like they try to go for like 1980s Levi's pants kind of thing, Levi jeans. So they have like sort of English oilcloth jackets. Mm-hmm. They'll have like leather bomber jackets, kind of like from the 60s kind of thing. It's like somebody put a lot, like usually there's like 2 or 3 stalls, and it's like a lot of effort went into curating it. Mm-hmm. The price reflects it. I mean, it's money. It's also not necessarily Italian. It's like, right.
It's kind of for people who are young and hip to come to and find young and hip people clothing kind of thing. It's like, at least that was the impression we got when we were there, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is, wow. But there's also like a jewelry stalls, there's art mm-hmm. stalls, there's I think some there's some sort of screen printed t-shirt stalls, mm-hmm. leather goods, and
local artisan made.
Yes.
There was one person the last time we went, and it was swimsuits that he made, right?
Yes.
And all of his swimsuits had sort of graphics that explained folk tales.
Yeah, like sort of folk fairy tale. Like
it was really fascinating. So it's very artsy, new artsy in that it's young people making sort of artisanal things, I think. But like we keep saying, the price is reflected in that they're artists,
And a lot of them seem to be, if this is not their full-time job, it's certainly they're on their way to making this their full-time job. So that's like where the price is also reflected. It's not like, oh, I found the perfect little piece of artwork for $5. It's like, oh, I bought a small print for $20 because this person needs to afford food in Rome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we mentioned this. It's open Saturday, Sunday.
We did not. Okay.
From 10 to 8 p.m.
And
it's
also
10 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Yeah, and it's also indoor.
Yes.
Actually, properly indoor. Like,
it is in a physical building.
Yeah, roof and everything. So it's great though if it's raining. If you're in the neighborhood mm-hmm. and it's raining, that's actually when we went because it's indoors. Why not? It's a perfect time to go. You can't really walk around and see stuff if it's pouring rain. Mm-hmm. And it's tiny. I mean, you'll see it in 40 minutes tops. It's
one large room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just sort of a gathering hall.
Yeah. And in that same neighborhood, I mean, like just steps away really, are quite a number of other vintage shops that are not mm-hmm. markets. They're properly vintage stores. And all of those vintage clothes are also curated. Not to the point that I feel like the stalls in Mercato Monti are, but it's people's jobs to buy and sell very specific clothing. And they're geared towards younger people, as well. It's the same thing you would find, I think, in vintage stores in the U.S. and vintage stores in the UK.
There's also, I'd add, there's still there is a level of like cool American stuff. So there's a lot of these vintage stores. They are curated, but they have like Levi's again. They have diesel jeans. They have like, flannels, which is obviously not a thing in Italy. It's kind of feel like I really enjoy them, but they are a bit like, oh, it's all the cool stuff from an American vintage, American like used clothing vintage store. But it's also kind of got a little bit, maybe slightly higher price tag or maybe in line with American prices.
I think what I found in most of these vintage shops were prices in line with U.S. vintage stores. Like a sundress is 20 to 25 euros, which right now is pretty close to $20 to $25.
Yeah.
But that compared with, Porto Portesi, I found a vintage dress for 50 cents.
Yeah, exactly.
But the same dress would have been 20 to 25 euros in this shop.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing. It's like it is a great place, but it's and we'll put them in the description, by the way, rather than listing them out. We'll just drop them all in the description. They're all, like Darcy said, they're all within a couple of 20, 30 meters of each other kind of thing. It's like a little stretch. But they all definitely all have a aesthetic. Some are men's clothing, some are women's clothing only. And some are just sort of
mixed,
whatever they have kind of thing. But by and large, I mean, I guess it's like I went in thinking like, oh, it's gonna be all vintage Italian, and I was like, oh, and there is some vintage Italian for sure. It's like sweaters and stuff was a vintage Italian sweaters rather than like by the American style, sort of very sort of you can kind of tell the collars and things like that is very like even Roman. But besides that, I was like, oh, this is like kind of this is all American. Mm-hmm.
But like new artsy hipster vintage, and with the Mercato Monti, new artisanal stuff. Yeah. That's the sort of theme of that area, I think.
And I guess moving into the last of them is sort of the 1 stars. The sort of, if you're already there, it's a fair way to put it, I think, right?
I think so.
You're not.
Because do you want to talk about Testaccio?
Well, actually, let's talk about Testaccio first.
I think that one's a destination.
Okay, sure.
We've talked about this one before in our previous episode about food markets, because you can go and have a lovely lunch there. But it's also actually indoor, and it's separated into sort of like little boutique booths and locally screen printed t-shirts, the little pasta restaurant sort of booths. There's fruit stalls, and there's also a couple of different, like new shoe vendors. You'll find the classic older Italian lady, it's like a loafer shoe, but on a wedge, which I love.
So orthopedic,
like orthopedic, but stylish. But they have a couple of curated boutique style used clothes. I wouldn't call them vintage necessarily, but it is used clothes.
Yeah.
But again, you're paying the price for somebody else having looked through piles for you. But I think it's worth it. I think it's a great little artsy sort of place to spend an afternoon.
And then the neighborhood I think around it is really quite pleasant. It's
very cute.
Yeah, it's a little artsy. It's a little kind of cute. There's some restaurants and stuff. It's definitely off the beaten path for a tourist, I would say. But if you're okay with being off the beaten path, it's worth it to go there. Again, you get lunch, you get dessert, you get drinks, you get this, check out some stalls, you get some gifts. So it's worth the trip if you need to go spend a lunch somewhere.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, so I would recommend going there twice. So I guess after that though is a sort of 1 star. 1 star in the sense of not that so these are bad. 1 star in that sort of sense that
if you're there,
go.
If you're not, it's not a destination.
Yeah, exactly. And the first one is a sort of you might notice that at the sort of different metro stops and tram stops will have a market set up. It's usually at the beginning and end of the terminus, if you will.
So like at Piazza del Popolo, it's also the Flamingo stop.
For the tram.
Yeah. Yes. And where you can pick up the subway.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty big version of these. There's 7? I would say there's 7 tents there, typically, with new and used clothes.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's a shoe stall. But that's pretty typical of the little Roman street markets that just pop up at the end or beginning of
Exactly.
train or tram stops.
And we've been to stuff before like that. There's wandering around neighborhoods, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a market. There's like 20 tents on the side of the road, and it's sometimes they don't really have a specific name so much as just basically a lot of the neighborhoods had their own market at one point. With the vegetables and the fruit and the clothing and this and that and the other thing. And as obviously the neighborhoods became less and less defined and more sort of homogenized, a lot of these markets closed down. But it's like New York City had the same thing. It was sort of like, you didn't go into other neighborhoods, you stayed in your neighborhood. So it's like, of course, you need your own market. So Rome's sort of losing that a bit. But there's still like just like, oh, on a weird Wednesday afternoon, and there's just a market popped up, and it's really.
And I think they're worth a little look around if you're there and you have time.
Absolutely, yeah, just for the heck of it.
But also, if you're in a rush because you're only here for a few days and you don't stop at one of them, don't have FOMO.
Yeah,
it's okay that you didn't go.
You're not missing. You're not going to miss out.
Yeah,
like I think we stopped at one that had like weird used stuff once, and I found a fun like old Zippo, and you found like some leather for a belt or something. But it's like, oh, we found a Wedgwood plate.
That was one of the best ones.
Yeah,
that was a weird one. Yeah.
But that's kind of like, that's what I mean. Like if you're like, oh, this actually has some weird stuff, let's just look for a second.
Yeah.
Then it might be worth it. The other sort of, if you happen to be there, markets are also actually they're not in Rome, and I know that some people like to go to different towns. Obviously, as day trips when they're in Rome, because you can. It's very easy to do. Ostia is one, near the coast of Fiumicino, kind of. Oriveto is a popular one. Bracciano, which is up at the lake. There's a few of those kinds of, like, they're all around Rome, about an hour away. And I know that it's a sort of, if you look up a guide to Rome, there's always going to be like, here's, some places to go. And one of the things I do recommend, that if you happen to go on a market day, typically it's like Friday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday, depends really where they are. Sometimes it'll be just Wednesday. But I would recommend, like, if it's at all interesting, that you go to a market there to check it out, because that, to us, is sort of where we find like the peak used clothing. Because Rome is great. I mean, Rome used markets are great. Porto Portese is fantastic, but the small towns around Italy have really interesting markets. I think, in our opinion.
Yeah.
And like the used tables, especially, there's very little like. Besides the standard sort of like separating by towels or men's clothing, women's clothing, this and that, there's no like, oh, this is the nice stuff, I'm going to keep this separate. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but
it's far less curated.
Yeah, it really, and it's no one's Googling like, oh, what is this brand? Like, how much is this worth? What can I get for this on eBay? And we found some just amazing pieces of clothing, both amazing in the sense that, like, I mean, one, like, oh, originally this was really expensive, or just, like a lamb's wool sweater, that's 30 years old, that's no holes and feels really nice, or cashmere.
And just quirky stuff too. I mean, they end up with a really odd arrangement of clothing, and it just hasn't been picked through and distinguished. So you just have a bunch of kind of odd and interesting pieces all together in a pile on a table,
I think it's also because you and I we have a different thing we look for, I think, than people who, like, especially when we're in the South. Like, I think you and I look for vintage, we look for handmade, we look for quirky, and I notice a lot of people in the South, it's sort of like, it's usually one of the two. I'm looking for clothes that just fit, don't really care what they are, or not like they don't care, but it's just if they're going to use it for like house clothes, they're going to use it for the garden or something like that. They're not like, it's not an important thing, or work clothes, or they're looking for certain brands, but they're the big brands in Italy that like young Italian, kids like to wear, kind of thing. Like, they're like, I need to look good, and maybe I need to find it used because new is too expensive. And so what you get left with is a sort of like I found like, wool shirts. And I found a Fjällräven jacket, like I mentioned. It's like,
you find a lot of linen shirts.
I found a lot of linen shirts, because they don't separate the linen usually in smaller towns. They just, toss them all together. And again, I mean, I think I mentioned at the beginning, I don't find pants because I cannot fit into them. But I think you found like a handmade silk shirt. You found like just really, really wonderful pieces. So if you are in a small town, if you happen to just be going for a day trip and you happen to be going there on the market day, it is possibly worth it to you to, stop and check it out. And
absolutely.
see if you can find anything, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. I mean, I think that's all the markets that, what are we at? An hour and 14 minutes, it looks like, around 15
Do you think
minutes.
that's it?
I think we pretty much nailed it. I think we pretty much got all the markets. I think, I can't think of anything else that
No, I think that sums it up. There are so many markets, and these are, I think, our top markets. And just to reiterate, Porto Portesi, number one, I think. Biasagno, absolutely worth going to. The rest are kind of, if you have time,
right,
or one of them really speaks to you, absolutely go.
Otherwise, otherwise have fun, just enjoy. It's a lot of it's just, we oftentimes will leave without having bought anything, but it's just fun being there and looking through stuff and kind of hunting and kind of being in that energy, because it's really, even though the Porto Portesi market is very touristy in a certain sense, it has a lot of tourists, there's still hundreds of Romans that go there every Sunday to buy clothes themselves, so that you very much get that feel of like you're in like traditional Rome in a certain sense. So I think, that's sums it up, I think.
Stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated. That's a big one.
Guys, stay hydrated.
Seriously, yeah. Especially now. But without any other information, thank you guys again so much for listening, and thank you again to Sue Sullivan for reaching out and kind of reminding us. We try to put these out more frequently, but now that we're in Rome, and we should put them out even more frequently than once every 6 months. We should put these out more frequently because we're here, and I think also, I guess now that whoever's gotten to the end of this will hear that we're probably, if anything changes, if any like information is new, we'll try to go and record much shorter things to just letting people know like what's changed as far as even simple things like time or things have closed or opened, because we have noticed that because it is kind of coming out of COVID, things have definitely opened up more. So if anything drastically is different, we'll definitely let you all know. But thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
If you, we hope you listen to our next podcast, and we hope you really enjoyed this one because it was very long.